Hey guys, and welcome back to Biologue. Hope you're having a great day and a great week. In this video, we're going to be looking at a walkthrough for yet another IGCSE biology paper, this one. So if you guys like this video and find it useful, make sure you let me know in the comment section down below. Like, share, and subscribe to Biologue. And without further ado, let's get into this video. Alright, let's begin. So question number 1, which process occurs in both plants and animals? Excretion, phagocytosis, no, definitely not, that's only in animals. Photosynthesis, no, only in plants. Transpiration, no, only in plants. So therefore the answer is A. Some statements about the species is given. Members of a species all look identical. Members of a species belong to the same genus. Members of a species can produce fertile offspring, and species are named according to an international system. Which one is correct? So number 1, members of a species all look identical. Not necessarily. There are species where, because of different DNA changes, for instance, because of different sequences of genes in the gene sequence in the DNA of the organism, they tend to have different phenotypical characteristics or different, physical characteristics. So they don't all look identical. Members of the species do belong to the same genus, that is true. Remember that we have a flow chart in your IGCSE textbook. Make sure you go through that flow chart from the classification of organisms chapter. I'm pretty sure that's chapter 2 in your IGCSE textbook. Members of a species can produce fertile offspring, yes. And members of a species are named using an international system, yes, that is true. That's also in chapter 2, classification of organisms in the IGCSE textbook. So the answer is 2, 3, and 4, which is D. Which structures can be found in the living cells? So in the cells of all living organisms, cell membrane, chloroplast, no, that's only in plant cells. Cytoplasm, yes, so cell membrane and cytoplasm, 1 and 3, which is C. Question number 4, in the diagram of a palisade cell, the distance between X and Y is 20 millimeters. The actual width of the cell between X and Y is 40 micrometers. Remember, the units are different. What is the magnification of the diagram? This is the formula for magnification. Magnification is equal to image distance or image length divided by object distance or object length. So what we need to do is make sure that we're converting the units in order to have the same units. So either you can convert millimeters to micrometers or micrometers to millimeters. I usually find that it's easier to convert the bigger unit into the smaller unit. So 1 micrometer, you need to make sure you're memorizing some of these. Make sure that you have a chart, stick it in your room somewhere, maybe on your, wall, and make sure that you have a chart of all of the unit conversions for the common units like meters to millimeters, centimeters, micrometers. I would even do nanometers to some extent. So 1 micrometer is 0.001 millimeters. So 40 micrometers is therefore 0.04 millimeters. And so what we need to do is between X and Y in the diagram and actual. So image distance, which is 20 divided by 0.04. This should come out to 500. So the answer should be B. Moving on to question 5, the diagram shows a root hair cell when does the water enter the cell by osmosis? So when the concentration of solutes outside the cell is greater than inside the cell, when the concentration of solutes inside and outside are equal. This is definitely not the case, because in that case you would have an isotonic solution or an isotonic state. So there is no net movement of water molecules due to the same concentration of water inside and outside the cell. When the water potential inside the cell is higher than outside the cell, then the water will leave the cell, because if you have a cell and you have more water inside, water always moves from a higher concentration to a lower concentration, higher osmotic potential to lower osmotic potential. So if there's more water inside the cell, it'll move outside the cell, right? So when the water potential inside the cell is greater, it'll move outside the cell. So this is not the case for the question that we're being asked. When the water outside the cell is higher than inside the cell, yes, that is true. Solutes outside the cell. Remember, if you have more solute, you have less water. So I want you guys to think of it as an inverse relationship. So when the concentration of solute outside the cell is greater, that means there's less water on the outside than inside. So water will actually move out of the cell, making the cell flaccid or shrink. So the answer, therefore, for question 5 is D. Question 6. Which row shows the changes that occur during germination of a seed? Respiration rate is increased. Remember, germination meaning growth, right? So think of it this way, that because the seed is growing, it requires more energy to be produced, and so we need to take in more air. More oxygen needs to enter the lungs, the metaphorical lungs of the seed, in order to make sure that it's producing enough ATP, which is our source of energy, right? So it has to increase respiration rates. Amount of energy required is therefore increased, and how ions are absorbed is active transport. So the answer therefore should be 6D. Question 7. The diagram shows a human alimentary canal in which structure is most glucose absorbed into the blood. So what we see here is question 7. Let's see. So A, B, C, D. So what is A in this case? It is the tract that is leading to the pancreas. No. Alright, so question 7. The diagram shows a human alimentary canal in which structure is the most glucose absorbed into the blood. So structure A is the starting of the stomach, right? So this is the stomach. This is the pancreas. This is the small intestine. And this is the large intestine. So what it's asking you is in fact not where the glucose is broken down. So remember, pancreas are the organ that releases the insulin, which is required for converting glucose into glycogen, which is then stored. But in this case, it's not asking that. It's asking which structure absorbs glucose. So remember, when you think about absorption, I want you guys to think about the intestines, right? Is it the small intestine? Is it the large intestine? With intestines, the large intestine predominantly represents excretion. So when you think of excretion, generally the thought that comes to your head should be the large intestine. So when you think of absorption of nutrients, especially through absorption, we think about the villi, right? The villus. So increasing surface area for absorption, we use the villus for that. Where is the villus present? It's in the small intestine. So the answer should be C. Alright, moving to the next one. Question 8. DNA contains pairs of bases. Which pair shows the correct combination of bases? Remember, A, T, G, C always. So A, C, no. C, G, yes. That's right. G, A, no. And T, G, no. So B is the answer. Easy question. Question 9. In which region of the alimentary canal is maltose digested? So maltose is the subproduct of glucose digestion. So this should occur in the small intestine, right? Because remember from the previous case, glucose is absorbed mainly in the small intestine. That is where most of the breakdown and digestion should also occur. So naturally the answer is C, small intestine. Moving on, question 10 is a graph question. The graphs show the effective temperature on enzyme activity. This is a very, very common question, so make sure you're paying attention to this. Enzyme activity is something that always comes up regardless of what paper you're doing. Every single year, there is always a question on enzyme activity. So this is the topic you should keep your eye out for. This enzyme has an optimum temperature of 30 degrees. Which graph shows the effective temperature on enzyme activity? So let's have a look at all of the options. So make sure that you know these two graphs very well. You need to know the pH graph and the temperature graph. Both of them actually do end up looking somewhat similar, but they are bell-shaped curves, right? This is just something that you kind of need to visualize and keep in mind for the biology exam. So yeah, I think when you look at it, this is an inverted bell-shaped graph, this one, so that's not the case. It's not linear for sure, so then these two options would cancel out. Therefore, this looks pretty much right. So D is the correct option. Next one is question 11. The diagram shows a leaf on a plant used for a photosynthesis experiment. At the start of the experiment, there is no starch in the leaf. A piece of black paper is attached to the upper surface of the leaf. The plant is placed in a bright light for 12 hours. 4 discs are then cut from the leaf and they're placed in the positions shown in the diagram. Which disc contains starch? Remember, for starch, we need to be using the iodine test, and the iodine test suggests that the color change that occurs is from brown to blue-black, bluish black sorts. So the green area is the one that will actually contain the chlorophyll necessary for the production of starch through photosynthesis. So you should only be really focusing on the green area. So the green area is essentially here. All right. So it does look like disc A is what the answer will be, because that's the only, circle that's on the green area. If you look at this is not on the green area, that's a white portion. These two are on the black surfaces, so they do not absorb any light that is required for the process of photosynthesis. So disc A becomes the natural correct answer. The graph shows the effective temperature on the rate of photosynthesis. Which statement explains the change in the rate of photosynthesis between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius? So 15 and 20 degrees Celsius. So there's a gradual increase. The reason for this, chlorophyll is able to transfer more energy in chemicals to energy in light. It is actually the opposite way. The chlorophyll absorbs light. The energy from the light is what is converted to chemical energy in the form of glucose, which is produced through photosynthesis. So the first option is not right. Enzymes involved in photosynthesis have denatured. Definitely not, because in that case, the rate of photosynthesis would severely decrease. It's increasing in this case, so that's not right. C, kinetic energy of molecules is increasing, resulting in more effective collisions. That seems to be right. Light intensity and not temperature is limiting the rate of photosynthesis. So what this is saying is only light intensity is limiting the rate of photosynthesis, which doesn't really make sense, because if light intensity was limiting the rate of photosynthesis, you would kind of see a, somewhat of stagnant rate of photosynthesis. So you would see a constant rate, or at least somewhat of a decline. You wouldn't see an increase. So that doesn't really seem right. So I would actually say the answer is C in this case. Question 13. The lack of which component of a balanced diet will lead to the development of scurvy? Scurvy, again, vitamin C. That's something just, you need to know off by heart. Make sure that you have this memorized to some extent. When you think of scurvy, okay, vitamin C. That's your answer. So 13 is C. Question 14. Which structure is the duodenum? The duodenum is is an aspect of the small intestine. So question 14, which structure is the duodenum? So the duodenum is an aspect of the small intestine. It's basically the part that leads into the small intestine. So it's not D. D is a part of the trachea. A is the stomach, so that's not it. C, yes, that does look right, because it's after the pancreas. It's definitely leading into the small intestine here, so that does seem right. B is the large intestine, so that's not the case. So question 14 should be C. Question 15. Humidity and wind speed are two factors that affect the rate of transpiration. How do these factors affect the concentration gradient of water molecules inside and outside the leaf? Okay, so for this question, I want you guys to think of two things, right? Humidity and wind speed. So humidity, you want to make sure that you have a lower concentration gradient. So when you have water molecules, too many water molecules on the outside, that is what represents humidity, right? So too many water molecules on the outside means that transpiration rates are going to be reduced, because there's already so much water outside that the leaf does not want to transpire and lose more water into the atmosphere. So essentially, when you have a high humidity rate, you will have a low concentration gradient. There's not much water that needs to be lost, so the concentration gradient is less steep. High wind speed raises the concentration gradient, so it's more like, when you have a gush of wind flowing, it's kind of like the water molecules get carried away by the wind, and so they flow more easily, leading to a, bigger difference in the concentrations of water between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, and therefore the concentration gradient becomes more steeper and it increases. So the answer should be A in this case. Question 16. During an investigation into the movement of substances in a plant, a ring of tissue containing the outer part of the transport tissue is removed as shown. The statement explains why swelling develops in the stem. So why does swelling develop in the top part of the stem? I think recognizing that it's the top part is important. So let's look at each of the options. Phloem has been removed, causing a buildup of sucrose and amino acids. That does seem right, because phloem only transports, food molecules like sucrose and amino acids, not necessarily water or mineral ions. So definitely option 2 is not right. Xylem has been removed, causing a buildup of sucrose. Again, xylem does not transport sucrose and amino acids. Xylem is responsible for the transport of water up the stem. So this is not right. Xylem has been removed. So to identify whether it's xylem or phloem, remember xylem only transports water in one direction, which is in the downward direction. Whereas phloem transports amino acids and sucrose in both directions, so in both the upward and downward direction. So the only possibility is actually for phloem to transport sucrose and amino acids up, and because that mechanism is disrupted, it causes swelling. So the swelling is actually the accumulation of sucrose and amino acids in the upper part of the stem. So the answer is A. The diagram shows a human heart. Which label shows a left ventricle? Very easy question. This is our left ventricle. So essentially, remember, you have two parts of the question. You have left and you have ventricle. So I like to remember this like it's opposite of my hands. Okay, so usually when you think of hands, right, my hand, if I'm writing here, this is the right side, this is the left side. But when you have the heart, it's like you're looking at it, through a mirror. Let's say it's completely reflected, it's opposite. So now the right side is here, left side is here. So atrium, ventricle, atrium, ventricle. So in this case, the left ventricle should be B. So the answer is
Alright, for question 18, which row shows features of an artery or a vein? So for this, make sure that you first off start thinking about the diameter and thickness of each blood vessel. So when it comes to diameter, we are actually talking about the lumen, right, which is the opening of the blood vessel. So the arteries versus the veins. So the arteries, because they're so thick in terms of the number of layers that they have, the actual opening to the artery is quite small in comparison to the vein. So an artery should have a small lumen, and the issue now here is thickness is not thin, right? Arteries are actually pretty thick. So just because their lumen is small does not mean they're thin. They are very thick. So B is not the right answer. Arteries do not have a large lumen. They have a small lumen. So that's not right. Veins have a large lumen. Yes, that's right. And they are thin. So C looks like the right answer. Veins are not small. They're not thick. Thickness is mainly for arteries. Cholera bacteria in the gut causes selection of chloride ions, which leads to secretion of chloride ions, which leads to diarrhea. Which diagram shows the correct movement of chloride ions and water? Okay, so for this, what we need to look at is, what actually causes this diarrhea, right? It says that secretion of chloride ions. When we say secretion is kind of like excretion, right? Removal. We're talking about removing chloride ions from within the cell. So the movement actually needs to be outside the cell. So in this case, this is not right. This means chloride ions going into the cell, which is not the case. Cl minus ions going into the cell, not the case. So it's between B and C. If we look at C, for instance, the reason why we have diarrhea is actually because of a lack of water, right? So then all of the food that we are consuming, ingesting, actually just comes out on its own. So there's a lack of water to be able to digest that food and actually make sure that it's excreted properly. So in that case, we need water to move out of the cell and not in the cell. So C doesn't seem right. Therefore, it does look like the answer is B. Question 20. Different stages in the process of expiration are listed. Rib cage moves downwards and inwards. Volume of thorax decreases and the pressure in the lungs increases. Air is pushed out of the lungs. Diaphragm and external intercostal muscles relax. Which is the correct order of these stages? So in this case, when you think about breathing, all right, we have to start with the diaphragm. The diaphragm is essentially that thick flab of tissue beneath our lungs, right? So the diaphragm is the thing that we need to start off with first. So 4 is the first option. Then we have the rib cage, because the diaphragm is actually a part of the rib cage, including the lungs. So when the diaphragm moves, naturally the rib cage also starts moving. So the rib cage comes second. After this, the volume of the thorax increases, and only then is the air pushed out of the lungs. So when you have air being pushed out of the lungs, what happens is the diaphragm actually goes up. So it contracts, it goes up, and the volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. So that's why, because there's not enough space for the air to remain in the lungs, it gets pushed out into the atmosphere. That's how you should think about it. So question 20, the answer is D. Question 21. Which row shows aerobic respiration? Aerobic respiration, remember, we do not have the production of lactic acid. We have the production of carbon dioxide and water. So the products are carbon dioxide and water. So automatically the answer is D. Okay, question 22. In which organ is lactic acid respired aerobically to remove oxygen debt? This is the liver. Remember, liver is responsible for breaking down the lactic acid to make sure we do not have accumulation of the lactic acid, which can be toxic to our body cells. So it is C. Question 23, the diagram shows a cross-section of a kidney. What are the correct names of the structures P, Q, and R? Okay, so P in this case is the ureter. Now this is quite difficult to say. This is the ureter. Q is the medulla, which is the inner tissue, and R seems to be the cortex. So it does look like the answer is B. Which statement describes what happens during... So for the previous question, right, make sure that you have a diagram of this memorized somewhere, because yeah, I think that's sort of the only way that you get to know what is what. And make sure you don't confuse between these two terms. I remember myself when I was doing my IGCSEs, I myself was very confused with these two terms, and I tend to mix them up. So make sure that you have a clear idea of what each term represents. Okay, question 24. Which statement describes what happens during transmission of an electrical impulse along a reflex arc? The relay neuron has receptor proteins which bind to neurotransmitter molecules. Yes, that seems right, because remember, what do we have? We have the sensory neuron, we have the relay neuron or the interneuron, and then we have the motor neuron, right? So the relay neuron is essentially that neuron with these receptors that then have neurotransmitter molecules which then go and bind onto the receptors on the surface of the relay neuron cells. So the relay neuron has vesicles. No, this is the sensory neuron. Sensory neuron has vesicles which then transport the neurotransmitters to the relay neuron. The sensory neuron causes receptor proteins to release transmitter molecules. This is almost right. So I can see why some people might be confused by this option. It is not the sensory neuron itself that causes the neurotransmitter molecules, and it's not the receptor proteins for sure that cause neurotransmitter molecules to be released. It is the vesicles inside the sensory neuron that release the neurotransmitter molecules once they burst. The sensory neuron impulses cause vesicles to release receptor protein molecules. That's also not right. It is the vesicles that release neurotransmitter molecules, not receptor molecules. Okay, so the answer is A. Question 25. During the pupil reflex in bright light, which describes the actions of the muscles in the iris. So this is the process of accommodation. Circular muscles of the iris contract and radial muscles relax. Yes, that's right. Circular muscles contract. Both muscles do not contract. It's like an inverse relationship. So one always contracts, one always relaxes. It is the opposite here, so that's not right. Again, both cannot relax. That's not right. So question 25, the answer is A. Question 26, which distribution of auxin causes the shoot tip to grow towards light? So remember, auxin movement occurs such that it's away from light, and also it occurs moving down through the stem. So it moves to the side of the stem that does not get exposed to light, and then it moves down the stem, right? So the movement is actually like this. If the light source is this, then the auxin molecules will move away from the light on the side that is not exposed to light. So it's not A in this case, because there's some very close to the light source. They all do not accumulate on the top of the shoot. That's not right. They do not move down very close to on the same side, as which the light is exposed to. So yes, this does look right. It's away from the light and it's moving down on the side that is away from light. So D is the right answer. Question 27. What is the advantage of asexual reproduction in a wild population? It is that identical copies can essentially be produced, so the numbers can be maintained for that population. So it reduces the risk of extinction. That's pretty much what it is. So population has reduced ability to respond to changes. No. It can increase rapidly when conditions are suitable. Yes. Shows a lot of variation. Absolutely not, because remember, asexual reproduction actually doesn't facilitate much of variation. It is sexual reproduction that allows for variation through crossing over of genes, because asexual reproduction produces identical copies. The whole population may be killed by a disease pathogen. Not, again, that doesn't relate to the question. It's not an advantage for sure. So no, so the answer is B. Question 27. The diagram shows the structure of part of a flower. The arrow represents the transfer of pollen. Which statement about the arrow is correct? So
The arrow represents cross-pollination in an insect-pollinated flower, not cross-pollination because it's within the same flower, it's a single flower. The arrow represents cross-pollination again, no. Arrow represents self-pollination, yes. These two options, in an insect-pollinated flower and a wind-pollinated flower. Wind-pollinated flowers, as far as I remember, do not have these specific structures like the anther. So it should be an insect-pollinated flower because your insect pollinated flowers will actually have that scent production in the flower, as well as production of certain substances like honey in order to attract the insects for pollination to occur. So the answer is C for question 28. Question 29. In a sperm cell, which structure contains the enzymes? Remember, this is the acrosome. It is the structure that looks like this. Excuse my poor drawing skills, but yeah, I think you guys get the idea. The acrosome is here. That is essentially what contains the digestive enzymes that can help break down the jelly-like coat of the egg. So the answer is 29A, acrosome. The following are involved in protein synthesis. In which order do they become involved when proteins are made? So in this case, the answer does look like DNA starts. So we start with DNA, then we move on to transcription, which is conversion of DNA to mRNA. Then we move from to translation, which is mRNA to amino acids. So it is 4. And then we've got, let's see, mRNA moves to the cytoplasm, yes. Then through a ribosome, then this. So 4, 2, 3, and 1. So for question 30, the answer looks like
question
C.
21. Now, it's completely understandable if you guys find these questions hard. I very much did so myself when I did my IGCSEs. So what I recommend is starting out with a Punnett square, all right? Whenever you have these like genotype matching, mix and match type of questions, you need to make sure you're starting off with a Punnett square. So a Punnett square looks something like this. We have IA. Let's do it properly. So we got IA, IO. Make sure you do it like pretty neatly in order to visualize, what's going on. So when we match it up, what we get is IA, IB. So IA, IB, IO, IB, IA, IO, IO, IO. So what is the chance that the child will have the same blood group as one of its parents? So either we need to get IAIO or IBIO. So IAIO is this, IBIO is this. So it's like a 50%. So 2 out of 4 is what the chance is. So it's actually 1 out of 2, so 50%. So the answer should be C. This your male would have an XY combination, female would have an XX combination. So what it'll look like is you have the male with the small red color blindness. So you have XRY and X big R, X big R. So when you match this up, what you're gonna get is XR, XR, Y and X bigger, XR and X bigger, Y and X big R. Okay. So what percentage will have the red colored blindness?
Proposal, but your manager has so many questions.
So it has to be caused by genes only. So the answer is B. Okay, question. So the chance of getting this is 50%. Okay, so the answer is C. Okay, question 33. Which type?
All right, the chance of it, you need to look at the small r gene. So the gene that actually causes the red colored blindness is your small r. So when it actually says red green blindness, you need to be looking at kind of both, I guess, having a small r and having a big R. So you'll have 50%, I'm pretty sure. When you look at this here, XR and XR here,
This is the only one that actually has both of the genes, so red and green color blindness. So yeah, it should be C, 50%.
Alright, question 33. Which types of variation can be inherited? So with this, variation caused by genes can be inherited. Variation caused by the environment cannot be inherited. Inherited meaning passing down of phenotypical and genotypical features, and phenotypical features are influenced by combinations of genes, which are the only things that can be passed down from one generation to another. Alright, so the answer is B. Which feature is a leaf adaptation for living in a hot, dry desert? So question 34. Hairy, yes, to some extent, because again, if you have hair, it allows for better transpiration rates, better heat loss, and just allows the cells or leaves to cool down better. That's one. Large surface area. Again, remember it's dry desert, so if you have a large surface area, it's gonna allow for further transpirations. That's not really good because already the environment is pretty dry, and so due to lack of water outside the cell, it's just not good for the leaf because obviously there's now a lack of water, right? There's less water, so having a large surface area will just further exacerbate the lack of water. That's not the case. Many stomata will do the same thing. It'll increase transpiration rates, making the leaf even drier and lose even more water. Thin waxy cuticle. Okay, thin waxy cuticle. I do think this is the answer. Hairy does not seem very convincing to me, so I do think it is D. But actually, upon checking the mark scheme, what the mark scheme says is the answer is A, which is interesting. So you guys can have a little bit of a discussion down in the comment section below. Why do you guys think it's A? I'll also have a look at potential reasons why and make sure I give an explanation in the comment section down below. So make sure you do check that out. Moving on to question 35. Which term is used to describe an organism that makes its own organic nutrients? This is definitely a producer. Carnivore is someone that eats meat. Decomposer is breaking down. Herbivore is just non-meat consumption, so basically vegetables and plants, and so producer does seem like the right answer. All right, question 36. The diagram shows two pyramids based on food chains that have a producer as the large tree. So what do the two pyramids represent? So the two pyramids, remember, P is increase in the food chain. All right, so you have more of organisms at the bottom and less at the top. So essentially this does represent biomass, and Q represents numbers. So it's sort of like you have the larger organisms, for instance a large tree, because it says the producer is a large tree, right? So when we talk about biomass, a typical food chain, the large organism, which actually is the producer in most cases, not necessarily has to be large, but the producer is at the bottom, right? So that's your typical biomass based food chain or food pyramid. So that would be the one with the largest being at the bottom and the smallest section being at the top. So P should represent biomass. And it's, remember, biomass and numbers, a food pyramid, are completely opposite. That's how I like to think about it. So the numbers one should be smallest at the bottom, somewhat large at the top, or at least bigger than the bottom portion. So the correct answer should be B in this case. Question 37. What is a negative impact on the environment caused by deforestation? So decrease in land for livestock production, decreased levels of carbon dioxide in the air. No, because again, that's a good thing, right? So it's not a negative impact. Decrease in land for livestock production, increase in flooding. Livestock production, remember, livestock is like animals, right? So we're not talking about plants here. So this doesn't really make sense. Increased levels of soil is not a negative impact, so that's not it. So C does seem to be the right answer, flooding. Question 38. A diagram shows positions of 4 arms and concentration of nitrates at 4 different points. Which farm is likely to have been using too much fertilizer on its land? So actually what's interesting, when I look at this question reminds me a lot of something I got in my 2021 exam. So I did my IGCSEs in 2021. And it's interesting because when I look at a lot of the questions in this paper 2 exam, it is extremely similar to what I used to practice when I was doing my IGCSE. So make sure this is like your indication, a reminder to make sure that you're consistently practicing past papers and doing them at a regular pace, because a lot of the questions do get repeated from previous years. Either, they use the exact same diagram. Like this diagram is the exact same thing that I saw when I was doing my IGCSE. So yeah, quick tip for you guys, make sure that you're consistently practicing and you will 100% get that A star. So which farm is likely to have been using too much fertilizer on its land? Let's see. So look at the graph below. Nitrate concentration, it's not this, it is the one with the largest one, because fertilizers generally do have these ions embedded within certain molecules like nitrate. So highest nitrate concentration is the one that will be using the most fertilizer. So it does look like A is the right option. This is even lower, this is even lower. So C, D is not right. B also doesn't seem right because it's after this A point. So yeah, A is the right answer. The diagram shows a bacterial cell containing a plasmid. What is inserted into the plasmid if the cell can be used for the production of insulin? The length of DNA from a human, yes. Length of DNA from another bacterium, no. Molecule of insulin, no. Enzyme, definitely not. Remember, we are talking about genetic recombination here. So essentially a plasmid is a bacterial circular circular molecule of DNA. In this, we have another gene inserted. This is usually a human insulin producing gene. So it's a gene from a human that produces insulin. Then the bacterial plasmid replicates multiple times. We have many plasmids forming, and those plasmids produce a large quantity of insulin, which then can be used commercially, right? So that's A. So A seems like the right answer. Question 40, last question. The yeast carries out anaerobic respiration, making carbon dioxide and ethanol as end products. Which end products can be used to make biofuel and bread? Carbon dioxide, no, cannot be used to make biofuel. Ethanol can be used to make biofuel, because biofuel is essentially, formation of your fuel through triglyceride formation. So triglyceride and alcohol. So ethanol is used there. Bread can be formed through carbon dioxide, because it requires that those bubbles of carbon dioxide to be able to have the bread and to allow the bread to rise in the oven. So the correct answer looks like C. And that is it for this video, guys. I hope you found this video useful, and I hope that the answers that I've provided with you guys have made sense, and it's helped you understand certain topics better in the IGCSE biology syllabus. And with that, I will see you guys in my next video. Good luck for your exams.